who's using home heating oil with a higher emissions profile is able to get a 3-year break while we're suffering through the minus 35-degree winters that we often have. It's absolutely not fair, and I do think it is the obligation of the members of Parliament to ensure that fairness in application of federal policy applies to all products in all regions for all types of uses, and that's not happening.
Yeah, I know it's truly unfortunate how asymmetrical the approach from the federal government has been on so many of these issues. The solution that the Prime Minister and his eco-activist minister brought forward were heat pumps, and as you know, I'm in Fort McMurray. Heat pumps don't work super well in minus 50. In fact, they don't really work in minus 20. Do you think heat pumps are a good solution for northern Alberta winters?
They may work in some jurisdictions, but I can tell you in Alberta, my understanding is our insurance companies will not insure a home that only has a heat pump. It needs to have a secondary backup because, as you described, in most places of the province, it will routinely get below minus 30. If pipes freeze, that causes a major insurance wreck. And so they're just not practical in the extremely cold climate that we have in Alberta.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your strong advocacy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kusmirchuk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Premier, for being here with us today and having this important conversation. Affordability is absolutely at the center of everything that our federal government is doing, and I appreciate that you are part of that work. I wanted to set the record straight right off the bat. The oil to heat pump affordability program is not just available to communities in the Atlantic provinces. That is a program that is available across Canada from coast to coast to coast across all communities. And as you rightfully pointed out, Premier, home heating oil is often the most expensive, but also the most polluting type of oil. And so, again, our federal government has extended that program to all communities across Canada, including in Alberta and including in my home province of Ontario. Premier, I also wanted to highlight the fact that, again, I appreciate how the chair has unilaterally called these meetings and invited yourself and others to testify here because it is such an important meeting. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that it is interesting to me that out of the permanent Conservative members of this OGGO committee, none have showed up other than the chair to ask questions of the Premier of Alberta, Premier of Saskatchewan, even though 3 of those permanent members are from Alberta and Saskatchewan. I wanted to highlight the irony of that as well, too, and it is unfortunate. But nonetheless, those that are here are really keen on talking about affordability and about climate change, which are top priorities for this government. Premier, I am very concerned about the fact that you're here to talk about and raise your concerns about the carbon pricing, which will add 3 cents per liter on gas on April 1st. And yet at the same time on April 1st, Premier, you are raising the gas tax in your home province to 13 cents, increasing it by 4 cents. I understand you were at an Axe the Tax rally yesterday, I believe, with the leader of the opposition. Can you clarify for me whether you were protesting? Was it a rally to axe your tax on the gas tax, which is adding 4 cents to a liter? If you can just clarify that for me. If you were at a rally to axe the tax that you are increasing in your province by 4 cents.
Sure, happy to answer that. I should let you know that there are 12,000 Albertans that have home heating oil of our nearly 5 million population. So I think just by those numbers, you can see that your program does not apply equally across the country. I would say as well that as I mentioned, we have had $7 billion worth of foregone revenues because we've been trying to compensate for the inflation crisis at the federal level. In fact, we
Premier, sorry, I don't mean to obtrude. My time is limited here, but are you speaking out against your government's 4 cent increase on the gas tax on April 1st? I'm just curious. And will the government listen to your concerns?
Well, the federal government charges 35 cents in gasoline taxes. We charge 13 cents. Our 13 cents goes to build roads. If your environment minister would let you build roads, maybe some of yours would go to build roads as well.
We do. Thousands of them every year. We do.
Well, he certainly doesn't seem to want to anymore.
Yes.
And the 17 cents, as we know, will not go to build roads.
Premier, I appreciate you not wanting to answer my question on that very sensitive issue of you raising the gas tax by 4 cents in your province, especially in a period right now of really where there's an affordability crisis. But I am very worried about the fact, Premier, that last year you had 2.2 million hectares of land burned in Alberta, and you had 299 days of smoke days in the city of Edmonton. Both records, absolute records. Can you tell us whether climate change caused these wildfires and these smoke days? Yes or no?
I would say that 60% of the fires are caused by human activity, and so we're doing a public campaign to make sure that people are safer.
Well, I thought you would say that, Premier, because I looked at a report from your own Forestry and Parks, which stated that there were 1,121 wildfires last year. Of those, 91 were caused by arson, which is and that includes 262 acres. Out of the 2.2 million acres that were burned, it's only 0.1% of land that was burned was caused by human activity. Can you speak about the vast majority that was caused by, again, by drought conditions and the heat conditions in your province? And furthermore, the most important question, Madam Premier, what are you doing to fight climate change and the forest fires and the drought in your community that is devastating land in your community and communities?
Well,
I apologize,
60%.
Premier Smith, I apologize, but Mr. Kuzmierczak has used up his time. You can respond in writing, because I understand we do have to get you out at a certain time. I apologize. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5, please. Oh, Mrs. Vignola, I apologize. Welcome back. For 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup. Madame.
Thank you very much, Premier. Thank you very much for being here at the committee. Now, my colleague spoke to you about our desire for autonomy, sovereignty. We don't necessarily have the same take on what that would look like, but when it comes to the current budget, we're talking about over $250 billion that are being transferred to Quebec and the Canadian provinces, including transfers to governments, seniors and family benefits, and that's a substantial amount. But despite how substantial those finance allocations or funding allocations are, the transfer payments for healthcare to the provinces are not adequate. Now, I think you demanded or requested 35%. And what will the federal government's refusal in that regard have in terms of an impact on Alberta's finances?
The way the program was initially drafted, it was supposed to be an equal cost-sharing program. I think over time it developed to a 65-35% cost-sharing program, and all the premiers advocated for the federal government to live up to that spirit. They didn't, but we have to make sure that we're providing health care regardless of whether the federal government wants to be a partner. So we're in the process of doing a major hiring of family doctors, nurse practitioners, so we can shore up our primary care system. We're working on getting alternative levels of care patients into appropriate facilities for continuing care, addiction treatment, mental health. And we're going to be expanding our surgical capacity. Those are the things we're going to do, regardless of whether the federal government wants to be an equal partner.
Donc, je comprends que le poids.
So I understand that this burden on Alberta's finances is getting bigger and bigger. And is that correct?
I think it's the case for every province. I believe that when we first started being concerned about healthcare costs, it was consuming 20% of our budget. Now it's over 40%, and we still have the pressure of the baby boom population that is going to add not only surgical costs, but also long-term care costs. Plus, we're in the middle of a mental health and addiction crisis, so the pressures are going to continue.
En effet. Vous parlez...
Mr. Backrack, go ahead, please, for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Premier, previously you mentioned the government's decision to create a carve-out for Canadians who heat with home heating oil. And you mentioned the inequity of the way that that was approached, and I think there's some agreement there. Our proposal was somewhat different, to give Canadians a break by taking the GST off all forms of home heating. Is that an approach that you would support, given that it would create equity and it would actually result in more savings for people right across the country, regardless of how they heat?
I think it's a great idea, because then it would also remove the problem of the tax on tax that we have on both home heating costs as well as on the price at the pumps. I think it would be a reasonable, just sort of reasonable compromise.
And why do you think that the government, instead of doing that, chose the approach that they did?
Well, I think they want to take credit for transferring back 75 cents on the dollar, thinking that people aren't going to notice that they took the dollar in the first place. And I guess I would look at it, and I sort of question the approach. I kind of wonder what the Liberal members think is going to happen with those dollars. So they come back with $400. Do they think someone's going to go out and buy a $60,000 electric vehicle? Do they think they're going to put $10,000 of solar panels on their roof? Do they think that they're going to convert to geothermal, which costs $20,000? Like, if we want to make a real impact on the kind of vehicles people drive and the kind of heating that they use, those are substantially more investments that are going to be made than a token measure to rebate back a tax. I think I would rather see other programs that would stimulate those kinds of choices.
And you mentioned the emissions plan that you have tabled. Mm-hmm. Now, I assume that this is a commitment to reduce absolute emissions in Alberta over time towards this goal of 2050. In that plan, have you done an analysis of the cost per ton? Like, as I understand it, you're relying heavily on technologies that are not only expensive, but aren't proven at scale. Has there been an analysis on the cost per ton relative to other approaches, like the pricing approach that the federal government has taken?
Well, I can tell you that we will have 3 net zero major industrial operations within the next 2 years. Air Products Hydrogen, the Dow Chemical, Petrochemical, Heidelberg Cement, and let me add Interpipeline as well, because they're going to be an ammonia project. And we do have at scalability, because our former Premier Ed Stelmach invested over $1 billion in building out Shell's Quest project so that we could firm out the technology. It has now stored 11.5 billion metric tons of CO2, I believe, over in Saskatchewan.
The question was very specifically on the cost per ton of those reductions. Is there an analysis that shows that using those approaches to reduce emissions on a cost per ton basis is less expensive for Canadians than the approach that the federal government has taken?
Well, I can tell you, when I hear the federal environment minister say his approach won't work till 2060, and I've just given you 4 examples that will work within 2 years, it does seem to be that the outcome is what we should be looking at. And if we can get to a net zero outcome, that should be the goal.
Thanks. That is our time. We'll have 2 last 4-minute rounds. Mr. Lawrence, go ahead, please.
And thank you, Premier Smith, for being here today. Appreciate your time. My question will focus on the carbon tax and productivity. Of course, Canada is, as the Governor of the Bank of Canada said, in a productivity crisis. One shining example, or exception, I might say, is Alberta. The average GDP, for example, per worker is about $50 per hour, I should say, about $50. In the energy sector in Alberta, it's $500. My concern is that the carbon tax and other actions by the federal government are putting sand in the gears of our economy and slowing down our productivity when we can least afford it. Would you share my concern?
I do share the concern, and I can tell you that we have had to take a whole variety of measures in order to be able to assist our individuals so that households are able to manage through the inflation crisis that we're facing and have more dollars in their pocket in order so that they can go out and buy the things that they need to, so that we can keep the economy rolling. We had our fuel tax relief program, which I mentioned, saved $2.3 billion because we took it off for 2 entire years. We re-indexed Asian income supports. We gave $20 million to food banks. We've reduced the increase year over year in auto insurance. We've re-indexed our personal income tax. We've supported post-secondary students with a cap on tuition increases. We've supported wage growth in the social sector. We've given rental supplementary supports. We've created an affordable housing plan that'll spend $8 billion over the next 3 years. We've reduced electricity costs through rebates at a cost of $500 per household, or $1 billion over the course of that. And we've given affordability payments of $100 per month for 6 months to our lowest income individuals at a cost of $625 million. All of these are to make sure that people have enough money in their pocket to be able to keep our economy going, because that lends itself to businesses being able to have the dollars they need so that they can make the investments they need to make so that they can improve productivity. It would be helpful if the federal government would stop making it so hard for people and did something equivalent to put the same amount of dollars in the pocket of consumers so that we could keep our economy going strong.
Thank you very much, Premier Smith. And to prove that Ontarians can indeed share with Albertans, I'm going to split the rest of my time with Mr. Alon.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Premier, thanks again for being here and always standing up for Albertans. I'm interested to know, what are you hearing from our great Alberta ranchers, our farmers, our agri-food industry and producers about this carbon tax scam?
I can tell you they're very frustrated because they're producing food not only for us, but for the world. We know that we're not only in an energy security crisis, but a food security crisis. And if you talk to the grain growers, they'll tell you they are already a net negative business. So yes, they do have inputs, but they're reducing the amount of fertilizer they use and the inputs that they use. But their whole business model is capturing CO2 into the food products for export. When you talk to ranchers, it's the same approach, that ranchers do an amazing job managing biodiversity and our landscapes. Our landscapes in Alberta were created by millions of bison roaming on the lands. And because of that deep fescue, it captures the CO2, not only in the blades of grass, but then also deep into the root system and also the microbes that are in the soil, increasing organic material. And none of that seems to be understood, is that in fact our food producers are providing a service to the planet, not only providing a secure supply of food, but also in addressing some of these environmental issues. So they're very frustrated that every time they use an input, they get walloped with a tax, but they don't get the credit for the biodiversity offsets they provide.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nakfi, go ahead, please, sir, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Premier. Premier, you were speaking about affordability issues in Alberta and across the country. On the other hand, you are raising your gas tax by 4.5 cents. Does it come with a rebate for Albertans, very similar to how the price on pollution through the Canada Carbon Rebate will be giving $2,160 to rural Albertan families?
We eliminate it completely when the price goes above $90, which we did for 2 years. We will eliminate it again when it starts, when the price trends above 80. I'd in fact love to see the federal government do the same thing, that when gas prices are high, they take their tax off completely like we do, and when they're low, they bring it back on.
Sorry, Premier, I have a very limited time. So the answer is that there will be no rebate for Alberta families for the increase they will see on April 1st by 4.5 cents.
The Albertans will get it removed completely if gas prices remain high, and I'd love to see the federal government do the same.
So there is no rebate at the moment. Thank you.
As I said, the federal government could always follow our approach and remove it completely.
Premier, earlier this year, you imposed a moratorium on all renewable energy projects in your province. Your decision impacted over $33 billion in energy investment and over 24,000 jobs. 6 months later, you then released a plan that would permanently ban or limit the construction of renewable energy in over 75% of Alberta, citing a concern that renewable energy projects have an impact on, and I quote, viewscapes. My question is, do oil rigs impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
The wind turbines are the size of the Calgary Tower or the CN
asking about
Tower,
oil rigs. I'm asking about oil rigs, Premier. Yes or no? Do they impact viewscapes?
No, they're not the same size as the Calgary Tower.
Do coal mines impact viewscapes? Yes or no?
We only have 4 advanced coal projects in Alberta. The coal mining is actually more of a British Columbia issue.
Does the Gracie Lake coal mine, a project on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, impact viewscapes? Yes or no? I've got very limited time, Premier.
That was a project from the 1950s, and it's currently not in operation.
But does it impact viewscapes?
It's currently going through a regulatory process.
So do you think that oil and coal mines have a lesser impact on viewscapes than solar panels would?
I would say, as I said, it's the wind turbines we're concerned about because of the size of the Calgary Tower. And in some of these projects, there's 100 or 200 of them on a single site. And they also find themselves in migratory pathways, so they have an impact on bird and bat populations.
So
all of those things are a concern to us.
your restrictions will not impact solar panel projects, renewable projects in the province of Alberta?
They will. The issue around solar is making sure that it doesn't take up arable land, prime agriculture land. We're spending a lot of money with the federal government on irrigation, and there's certain uses that are incompatible. You can't put pivots on a landscape that has acres and acres of solar panels. So we're asking for them to be moved to marginal landscapes.
So I'm having a hard time if you're not going to allow renewable sources of energy to take place and create thousands of jobs and investment in Alberta. How are you proposing to reduce emissions that you're claiming that Alberta is doing when the evidence is to the contrary?
Well, the reason why we have so much solar and wind in our province is because we have a free market. You'll notice that there are many other jurisdictions that don't, so they don't have wind and solar. But the reason wind and solar makes sense in our province is because there's natural gas backup. You can talk to any solar or wind provider, and they know that we need natural gas. Natural gas has a carbon tax on it. And so if you want to see more wind and solar, you should take the taxes off of the peaker plants that are going to back them up.
Thank you, Premier. Chair, I'm just going to use my remaining time to move that the committee invite the International Association of Firefighters, IAFF, to appear in relation to the ongoing study on the main estimates. Thank you.
Sure. Well, how about if we release our witness and we can go to that?
Thank you.
Premier
Thanks,
Smith,
Mr.
thank
Chair.
you very much. I appreciate your
Appreciate
time.
it. Thank you to the committee.
Did you want to propose by a certain date or anything, Mr. Nakvi, or?
As soon as yeah, we should have them. You're so good in scheduling witnesses so urgently that I have full faith and trust in you.
So on Good Friday, we'll be meeting with the IAFF. Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Speaking list, or are we fine to adopt that, colleagues? Do you want to just read it in slowly, just so make sure? I have Ms. Atwin, but do you want to just repeat it slowly, just so our clerk can write it?
I will, and I would suggest that as soon as possible, Chair. And the motion reads that the committee invite the International Association of Firefighters, IAFF, to appear in relation to the ongoing study on the main estimates.
Sure. Before the estimates are tabled. How's that? Yeah. Ms. Atwin and then Ms. Backrack, or Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking for some clarity. I wasn't sure if you were joking or not about meeting on Good Friday. I mean, this week has been full of surprises and curveballs, so I wouldn't completely rule that out, but I'd really like to know because I'd like to celebrate Easter with my family. Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Mr. Backrack, go ahead, then Mr. Kusmirchuk, then Mr. Lawrence.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I support the motion. And
Salut, Julien.
Nope.
Ça va bien, je suis en comité.
Oh, there we go. She's
Sorry,
on with
start
somebody
again,
else,
Mr. Backrack, please.
Yes, I certainly support the intention behind the motion and certainly support many of the goals of the International Association of Firefighters. I'm just curious because our study of the estimates is now taking some twists and turns into areas that are not traditionally directly associated with the estimates. Perhaps the mover of the motion could just provide a little bit of background on the subject area so that we can prepare adequately for the meeting.
Sure. We have Mr. Kusmirchuk, then Mr. Lawrence up, and then we can get back to Mr. Nakvi if he wishes to respond to that. But go ahead, Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And what I would just say as soon as possible, but during a regular sitting of the committee when the House is in session and when the House is sitting.
Fair. Mr. Lawrence, and then we'll go back to Mr. Nakvi if he wishes to respond. Mr. Backrack, and then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to amend the motion by including the following: Premier Fury, Premier Houston, and Premier King.
Very nice. Sub-amendment. Okay, I will take a speaking order on the sub-amendment. Ms. Vignola, your hand is still up. Is that on the sub-amendment or the original amendment? And then Ms. Atwin, I assume, on the sub-amendment?
Ça peut être autant sur...
Well, it could be on both, in fact. The sub-amendment more the amendment. Well, as far as the Premier's appearance is concerned, here's my question. When we've gotten through the 10 Premiers of Quebec and Canadian provinces, as well as those in charge of the territories, well, it's important to hear from them, and I'll say this and I'll repeat it once again. I'm absolutely convinced that hearing from them will help us to reach consensuses, find solutions. That said, is this committee the right place? Well, yes, I know it's a matter of budgets, but shouldn't the premiers who have their own fora to discuss these issues, well, how should I put this? I'm just opening the door here to this possibility. If the committee does agree to hear from each and every premier from nationwide, and that is a majority decision, well, that's how it'll be. But I'm just wondering if we are the appropriate forum for this, the right place. Now, as far as the Firefighters Association are concerned, I'd be very curious to hear what the rationale is behind this. We seem to be, in a sense, kind of the omnibus committee. Folks that should be appearing before the Environment Committee, the Finance Committee, that would better meet their objectives, and yet here they are landing here with us. So I'm kind of desperately trying to understand that, but I'd like to hear the rationale and justifications behind all of this.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Atwin, we'll get you. I have a point of order.
I'm hoping I'll have the indulgence of the committee. I mentioned Premier Fury, Houston, and King, but I omitted to say Premier Ford, which I meant to include in the sub-amendment.
Ms. Atwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo a lot of the comments of our colleague, Ms. Vignola, as far as rationale. I'd also highlight that Premier Houston asked to appear at Finance, not at OGGO, and the other premiers have not asked to appear here as well. So I'm questioning why their names would be included in this. I do appreciate that we're actually seeing a motion for this and that we're being involved in the discussion and decision making for this potential appearance, which is a nice market change from what we've been experiencing. But yeah, I'm going to need to know a bit more of the rationale around that as well. Thank you.
Kuzmierczak, are you fine yielding the floor to Mr. Nakvi to explain? Oh, and then Ms. Vignola, will we be able to go to Mr. Nakvi to flesh out his motion a bit before, or would you like to speak first? Okay. I'll speak on the motion, and then, of course, we'll get back. I see Mr. Halland, then we'll return to the sub-amendment. I realize it's a tiny bit out of order, but we've had many requests for you to flesh out this motion.
So you want me to speak on the main motion?
Well, it was request I think three of our members were asking you to flesh out why the estimates, et cetera. So why don't we do that, and then we'll return to the sub-amendment.
Yeah, so look, we've now just spent 2 days talking about price and pollution, climate change, carbon tax. Speaker, with all due respect, Chair, with all due respect to you, you unilaterally invited a few premiers to come and present here. I think it's important to hear from people who are directly involved in dealing with the impact of climate change. Our firefighters are on the front lines, and all of us members have heard from them the impact of climate change, the kind of circumstances that they are seeing right now on the ground in pretty much every province across this country in terms of climate change, in terms of the impact of floods. They are the one who are being called upon to come and help Canadians every single day. If we have given an opportunity to 3 premiers and come and deny climate change, deny any action that should be taken to fight climate change, I think it's important that we hear from people like firefighters also to draw the complete picture as to the impact of climate change on Canadians and what are they seeing that impact is and the impact on them.
Thanks. We'll get back to the sub-amendment. Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Halan, and then Ms. Atwin.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank my honourable colleague, Philip Lawrence, for a very, very good sub-amendment. That makes absolute sense and is very relevant. And I'll address some of the comments that Ms. Atwin made as well. I think it is important to have the other premiers here, as Mr. Nuckley said, to talk about climate change, but also the negative impact that the carbon tax has on families in their provinces as well. And to address Ms. Atwin, the reason why it's being taken up in this committee, is because the finance chair went into hiding when the premiers came calling. It was the chair of this committee, the great Kelly McCauley.
Point of order,
Edmonton
Mr. Chair.
West,
That
Edmonton
is
Mall.
point of order, Mr. Chair. That is inaccurate. That is
Thanks.
inaccurate.
I appreciate Mr. Kuzmierczak. That's not a point of order.
The chair of the Finance Committee was clear
Mr.
that he
Kuzmierczak,
did not receive
I
a
accept what you're
request from
saying,
the
but that's not a
majority
point of
of
order.
the committee.
Thanks.
So,
Continue,
yes.
Mr. Hallam.
I want to thank the great member of West Edmonton Mall for stepping up since the finance chair, Peter Fonseca, went into hiding when the premiers came calling. So I think it is appropriate in following that we have the premiers come here and testify not only on the impact of failed policies, environmental policies by this Liberal NDP government on not just the firefighters, but on their own residents in their provinces. And in one case of the premier that Mr. Lawrence put forward, it's a Liberal premier who said spike the hike against this Liberal NDP government that's absolutely obsessed with this carbon tax and making sure the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating go up, driving more people into a food bank, as we see 2 million people going into a food bank in a single month, and 1 million more projected to. And can you believe, in Canada today, there's a group of 10,000 Canadians in a Facebook group that are going dumpster diving because they can't afford food.
Point of order, Speaker.
All of these things
Chair.
are very relevant.
Chair.
Hold on.
That's why the premiers need to be
This
there.
is
We have a
not
point
the
of order.
Yeah, this is not the debate floor of the House of Commons. We've heard all your talking points. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's talk about this
Appreciate
motion,
it's not-
Chair, and
Thank you.
and let's get to it.
Thank you very much. If we could return, and just colleagues, just very quick. Oh, I see everyone wishes to speak now. Just very quickly on this, I was referring mistakenly to the amendment offered by Mr. Lawrence as the sub-amendment. We are on the amendment to the original motion from Mr. Nackby. Just to be clear, Mr. Arlan, if we can get back to and stay on the. Oh,
My point.
maybe not. I'm taking a speaking list. I have Miss Atwin, then Mr. Bragdon. Then I have Ms. Goodridge, Ms. Vignola, Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Kuzmierczak. Go ahead, Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the relevance of bringing in premiers to speak on an issue where we want to pull in the expertise of Firefighters Association. I think it's clear that the premiers were not experts on the main estimates. They're not necessarily experts on carbon pricing either. We heard a lot of rhetoric, but no real tabled information. And so again, I would question the linkages of this conversation around, again, we're supposed to be studying the main estimates. And so again, to highlight that those premiers did not request to appear before our committee. I think we should respect their time, actually, and the responsibility that they have to look after their own provinces, including mine at home here in New Brunswick. Again, there was an action in the legislature here in New Brunswick that was not taken as far as looking at electricity price increases. Instead, our premier was here to grandstand. And so I think this is all a game and a circus and a farce at this point. I think that Canadians deserve better than this. But I would like to, at the very least, if we're going to open this Pandora's box, I'd like to hear from experts on climate change. Perhaps natural resource ministers would be a better fit. I'm not proposing an amendment, but I'd just like to put that forward, that this is increasingly making very little sense, and it's certainly wasting our time as a committee.
Thanks. Mr. Bragdon, please. Sorry, you do not have a headphone on, Mr. Bragdon. Thank you, sir.
Sorry about that. I just want to clear up something here. Any idea that premiers should not be addressing this committee or any committee for that matter on behalf of their constituents and on behalf of the people that live in their provinces. Premiers are the first ministers of this country. They should be heard on any issue that we deem that we want to hear from them from or that they would like to have input for. They asked to speak to the Finance Committee. That was not granted. Now they've asked, and when asked to speak here, they jumped at the opportunity to do that because this is a top of mind issue for every Canadian. And I know back home here in New Brunswick, it is top of mind because every time they go to the grocery store, every time New Brunswickers fill up their car, every time they take their kids to a sporting event or they're going to work, they have to drive. And this tax is disproportionately affecting those of us that live in rural communities and small towns. And the fact that premiers want to address this committee and speak to this committee about this issue, I think it would behoove this committee to make sure every premier that wants to speak on this has the opportunity to do that. They are Canada's first ministers. We need to hear from them and they should be heard from. So I think we should go ahead with this.
Thanks. I have Mrs. Goodridge and then Mrs. Vignola and then Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's absolutely relevant to be hearing from our premiers. Their budgets are being impacted substantially from this. They have a very important space to represent when it comes to how this is impacting Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We heard today very clearly from Premier Higgs and Premier Smith how this is impacting and making families make very difficult choices. This is directly relevant to our supplementary estimates. This is absolutely critical information, and I agree with Madame Vignola que nous devrons avoir l'opportunité.
That we must have the opportunity to hear from each and every Premier. We're here to determine what the impact of a carbon tax is on their provincial economies and families.
It's political grandstanding coming from the Liberals wanting to shut down hearing from premiers that they don't like, being triggered by people that happen to be supportive of oil and gas. And frankly, we have to stand up against this. And so I fully support hearing more from this.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I really don't like people putting words in my mouth. Gee whiz, I really, really don't like it. I'm just going to rectify what was just said and also rectify what a Liberal member said first. Yes, it's important for me that the premiers of Quebec and the Canadian provinces can be heard by us. But, and a big but, I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying, but OGGO is perhaps not the right place for this to happen. There is a federal provincial roundtable, for example. There's the Finance Committee. That would be potentially the proper place for this. So please don't misquote me by only selectively quoting my words. Secondly, now I listened to this again on Parvu, and at no point have I heard from a Premier in attendance today deny the impact of climate upheaval, both on the economy and the environment. So just let me clarify things here. When people say, oh, yes, we've heard from folks who've denied the climate impacts and that other people are going to say, yes, those impacts do exist. Today, there was no Premier who denied the impact of climate change, and the Premier of Alberta stressed the fact that there were forest fires that were precipitated by humans, but she didn't deny the impact of climate change on the economy. So please, don't selectively quote me. You know, someone might say that I'm, a partisan of oil, a fan of oil. But listen, please don't selectively quote me. Please don't twist my words. please, it's important to not do this, to refrain from doing this. Now, as far as the premiers are concerned, I stand my ground. It would behoove us to study the estimates. Now, I understand that the premiers do have some input when it comes to the estimates. They want to be heard. We should be hearing from them. And they don't get the sense that that is actually happening. So there's the rub. They don't get the sense that, people are listening to them. There is a roundtable that is there for provincial and territorial premiers, including Quebec, and that is the proper forum for them to come up with solutions together and to dive deep into the issues. So that's what I said, and I'll repeat myself. Please don't put words in my mouth. Please don't twist anything that I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Kuzmierczak, I see your hand up, but I'm getting a sense from looking around the room that everyone's...
I'd like to say a few things, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know what? Over the last 2 weeks, the committee members here at OGGO were treated like doormats by you yourself, the chair. And we've raised that issue on a number of occasions where we weren't consulted. We weren't consulted on the meetings. We weren't consulted on the witnesses. And now what we're seeing, Mr. Chair, is the OGGO committee. And I've been on the OGGO committee for 5 years, and many of the members around this table have been here for 5 years. We do serious work here. We do good work around this table. We are worker bees around this table. We put our heads down. We do good work, and we study issues of great importance to this to our residents and our constituents in Canada. But I am seeing right now that good work and that spirit being thrown away, and the OGGO committee being turned into a soapbox for premiers, an election platform for premiers. And they have, as my honorable colleague mentioned, they have many platforms already that they can grandstand on. And I really take objection to the fact that they want to turn what is a hardworking committee, a dedicated committee, into their own personal grandstanding and soapbox and election platform. Do your campaigning somewhere else. We had 3 premiers come before this committee. Each of those 3 premiers have a wildfire crisis in their provinces where millions of hectares of land have been burned, billions of dollars in costs. And we heard 3 premiers coming here, all talk, no action, no plan for to fight and address the climate crisis. No plan, all talk, no plans, no action. And the screaming hypocrisy of premiers coming here to decry a 3% or 3 cent increase on the price of a liter of gas, 3 cents on the price of a liter of gas because of the price on pollution, when in their own provinces, the premier of New Brunswick is increasing hydro rates by 12%, and the premier of Alberta is increasing the gas tax by 4 cents, and not mentioning a word about that. And coming here and saying nothing about the fact that the parliamentary budget officer clearly stated in the last meeting, was clear as day, stating that 4 out of 5 families are better off with the price on pollution and the Canada carbon rebate. And no answers in terms of why the premiers, especially in the case of Alberta, a family of 4 in Alberta receives about $2,100 back on the Canada carbon rebate every year. And no mention about what that will do in terms of the affordability crisis that so many families are facing. And so there's nothing new that came from these conversations. It was nothing new. Everything that was said in the newspapers, was said already by these premiers in the media, on television, in rallies, nothing new. And all it did was take time away from this committee to do the work that it's supposed to do, that it's designed to do, and in this case, to study the main and estimates and provide a report back to the House of Commons. This is a complete taking over, taking hostage of this committee and its work, and its important work. And it raises the question as well, too. Each of these premiers, especially in Alberta, has a healthcare crisis on their hands. The heck are they doing here on a 2-hour committee meeting at OGGO, talking about spewing the same lines that they've said on every other platform in the media and newspapers, bringing absolutely nothing to this discussion, nothing new. They have a healthcare crisis in their provinces. What are they doing here at OGGO committee? Isn't there better use of their time? And finally, I would say the added thing that I would also add is, again, if these meetings with the premiers were so important, why is it that the 3 conservative permanent members of this committee were not present at any of the meetings and the testimonies of the premiers, especially considering that we had 2 conservative MPs, permanent members on this committee, that are from Alberta and 1 from Saskatchewan, and they weren't even bothered. They couldn't even be bothered to shake the sand off their sandals, grab a laptop and join us. Everyone else was here, including my NDP colleague that was not feeling, that was ill, that was downright ill, and made an effort to be here. And so I want OGGO to get back to the way it was, to focus on good work, asking tough questions, doing research, having opportunities to prepare for our witnesses so we can ask the tough questions, we could hold people to account, provide recommendations for the government for policies. That's the way we've done it for 5 years. But somehow the last number of months, this committee has been hijacked. Its members have been treated as doormats, and this committee is turning into nothing but a propaganda tool and a soapbox for somebody's campaigns. And that is not the way it should be. That is not the way it should be. And I asked the chair to listen to what the committee said in the last meeting when we passed the motion. Work with us. Collaborate with us. Let's get back to work. Let's put this childish grandstanding aside. Let's get back to the work that Canadians expect from all of us. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you very much. So can we get to vote on the amendment? Do so on division, colleagues. Sorry, you're requesting a recorded vote?
Yes.
Perfect.
The question is on the amendment put forward by Mr. Lawrence, that the motion be amended by adding the premiers. Ms. Atwin?
Against.
Mr. Lightbound?
Contre.
Mr. Nakvi?
No.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk?
No.
Mr. Sousa?
No.
Ms. Goodridge?
In favor.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mr. Halan?
In favor.
Madame Vignola?
No.
Mr. Backrack?
No. Oh, sorry.
We got both, Mr. Backrack, thanks. Okay, the amendment is defeated. Can we